Tired of big tech clashing with your Catholic values? Fide Chat is now live on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. It's private, encrypted, and built by Catholics for Catholics, with features like parental controls and more. Connect securely with family, friends, and groups. Download Fide Chat at fide.email. Technology without compromise.
You have no doubt heard of, and maybe you are one, who believes that Benedict XVI's resignation was not valid, or that he never resigned, or that he attempted to split the ministerial authority and the actual authority of the papacy. There are a number of groups number of types of viewpoints that all get lumped into one, which is that people believe that either Benedict was the last true pope, and that we were in interregnum from the time he tried to step away from the throne of Peter, or that we were in an interregnum from the time he passed away, or whatever. And there are various different labels for them, but they all get lumped into essentially some pretty nasty titles. But the one that's probably the one accepted the most by most of them are either interregnumists or Benny Papists. That Benedict was the last true pope. And if that is your position, that's fine. And I will give you a disclaimer right now. I am not going to lump you in with what you're about to hear, because this is not a mainstream position. There were certainly a large number of adherents to it. But there are also some fringe actors. And here we're going to talk about this. The story begins today with this, and it will then require going back in time for some context. And the story is this: Habemus Antipapem. An internet personality held a conclave in Rome to elect an anti-pope. Well, to elect the successor of Pope Francis. I know you might be a little confused by this. There was an actual conclave that did basically that in May, right? Well, this involves a character named Brother Bugnolo, operates the From Rome blog. And this goes back in time to the events in 2022 and 2023. You see, after Benedict XVI passed away, suddenly Brother Bugnolo, who believed that Francis was an anti-pope, that he decided to take it upon himself to enact an ancient law. See, back before the conclave system was ever built, there was a time when the Bishop of Rome, the Holy Father, the Pope, was elected by the people of Rome, the laymen and the priests together. So he invoked that to hold a conclave. And we're going to give you the context of how absurd this entire story is by going to an article from right after that conclave, reporting on it by Mr. Stephen O'Reilly. The headline: Bugnolan conclave and surprise move elects Bergoglio. Now, Brother Bugnolo called Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis, an anti-pope. So it was a little bit of a shocker when he went to conclave to elect a successor that he thought was valid to Benedict XVI, and then ended up electing Pope Francis. And it gets even weirder from here. But let's go to the original report so that you can hear where we are now with this story. This was published in January, at the end of January 2023. Here is the update from the Bugnolan conclave to quote-unquote elect a quote-unquote successor to Pope Benedict XVI. It appears that the conclave was hampered by very low turnout. Subsequent research points to a total of 4 attendees, Brother Bugnolo included, for his conclave. No surprise there. In other words, the conclave that was going to be the people of Rome electing a new pope had 4 people, including the organizer there. 4. So for those who think, well, it could have been valid, not with 4 people. But the big and surprising news is this: disappointing those who had expected Bugnolo might be elected anti-pope, and a move unforeseen by any of those caring to observe this farce, and against all seeming odds, the Bugnolan conclave has elected Jorge Bergoglio as pope. So Pope Francis has been elected pope by a group of Benny Papists. Reactions of other leading Benny Papists is not yet available. And I think the only reactions I saw to this 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, was mirth, kind of laughing at this whole thing. But given that Bugnolo's non-canonical conclave was by near unanimous agreement, on all sides expected to elect an anti-pope, It is possible other Benny Papists who opposed this conclave will now view Francis as a double anti-pope. And he gives you a full press release for this. This is Brother Bagnolo's argument for this now basically 3 years ago. Those who were against Catholics predicting a successor to St. Pio prevailed to convince many not to come to vote. And so the results of the election are as follows. Unanimous for Jorge Mario Bergoglio as successor of St. Peter and the successor of Pope Benedict XVI. The present electorate wants the world to know that they have chosen the only outcome that could be both universally accepted, and that is to bring the canonical order of the Church back into harmony with the will of Christ. In this, he follows the example of Roman Catholics who, under the threat from the imperial army, elected the deacon of the Eastern Emperor, who was a monothelite heretic. With his election completed, he was immediately converted to the Catholic faith under the power of the Jesus prayer. And so we hope and pray that the Lord, whose hands are now free to set the church in order, will now intervene in history without violating his promise to St. Peter, that whatever you bind on earth be bound in heaven. For my part, I have suggested as candidate Monsignor Gracida, Bishop Emeritus of Corpus Christi, Texas, USA. So that was the press release from basically 3 years ago. And I do remember Brother Bergoglio at the time saying that he expected Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis, to be transformed by this and to have the graces of the office lead him into essentially a non-controversial period in the church. We know how 2023 and 2024 and 2025 played out. So obviously it was a farce. And then people more or less forgot about Brother Bergoglio until you got this. Posted by Novus Ordo Watch. Absolutely hysterical. Alexis Bergoglio announces election of Pope Hildebrand, whose identity he cannot disclose for security reasons until he is consecrated a bishop. On Christmas Eve, this Pope-elect Bergoglio erroneously believes a non-bishop who is elected Pope does not become Pope until his episcopal consecration, will release a letter Bergoglio thinks will shake the Catholic world. Perhaps from laughter? According to Bergoglio, Hildebrand is the lawful successor to, get this, Francis. You can't make this stuff up. He issued this impressive-looking certificate announcing the election of Hildebrand in medieval black letter. Unfortunately, he didn't know that when a word ends in the letter S, black letter requires a round S, not a long S. This is the same brother Alexis who in 2020 tried to raise $1 million to provide Benedict XVI with security detail when he was in Germany visiting his dying brother. He didn't think the Vatican was giving him enough protection. So here's a screenshot of the actual post from the presumed anti-pope, Hildebrand, and then a statement from Brother Bergoglio in the light of this conclave. Now that the Holy Father has taken up residence in Regensburg, Germany, he lacks, well, this is from the statement from trying to raise money from the faithful to protect Benedict, because he wasn't getting enough of his security detail from the Vatican. He says, now that the Holy Father has taken up residence in Regensburg, Germany, he lacks the security detail that he had at the Vatican. This was premised on the idea that he was being banished to Germany, because there is some Catholic prophecies that talk about how the successor of Peter, the Roman pontiff, will be banished from Rome, and the Antichrist will take up residence in Rome. And so people thought that Benedict's travel to Germany at that time was a sign that he had been banished from Rome. This puts him at grave risk from crowds, protesters, domestic evil organizations, and all the daily problems which crop up when important persons move in public places. Help Brother Bergoglio's organization found a security company in Regensburg and provide the Holy Father with a security detail loyal to him. You can invest with our corporation for this purpose by purchasing our T-Series stock for foreign investments. It was a naked grift, this was. Our T-Series stock sells for $1,000 a share and is a restrictive security. We are currently offering 5,000 shares for private placement. $5 million USD. Capital raised through our T-Security stock goes entirely to the foundation of foreign corporations dedicated to the defense of Christians, will be owned wholly or in part by that organization. By purchasing our stock, an investor can invest in US dollars and obtain the benefit of a foreign investment. We estimate that this very important work of defending the Holy Father will require a capital investment of $1 million USD, or about 900,000 euros. End quote. I wish I was making the story up. It is so on its face absurd. But it's not. And that's the thing. It's so absurd. But at the same time, you can see how this goes, how people get to a place like this. Now, at least this time, his conclave didn't elect, Cardinal Prevost to be Pope. I guess Leo is a little too liberal for him. There's this emerging kind of almost consensus on the recognize and resist side that Pope Leo is actually more progressive than Francis was. I know that's shocking given his outward externals, dressing like a post-conciliar pope, speaking Latin, offering beautiful masses and the rest, and promising exemptions and exceptions to Traditionis Custodes for the bishops who ask for them. But we have, as just one detail, and I'll talk about this more, I think, tomorrow, waiting for confirmation. But even like some high-profile news outlets are now reporting on this, that the Pope might be about to announce a successor to Cardinal Dolwyn in New York, and that successor is an acolyte of Cardinal Cupich. Personnel is policy, and nobody trained under Cupich as an auxiliary bishop is going to be someone who does not get the stamp of approval of Cardinal Cupich. And so for some, these are all signs that Leo is at least as bad as Francis on a lot of scores. But here is a better shot of what Brother Bugnolo posted, a message from Papa Hildebrand in Latin, posted to X, by the way, by a very, I want to call him a centrist, a traditionally minded, a very sensible priest. Posted this to Facebook. His Alexis Bugnolo's group has apparently elected new pope. All hail anti-pope Hildebrand. Now, I don't know how many people attended this fake conclave of his. Probably more than 4 people. This wasn't advertised nearly as much as the previous one. This thing in 2022, in late 2022 and early 2023, made waves when he was doing it, to the point where a lot of traditionalist commentators and blogs and Substacks and everywhere else were writing about it and making fun of it, which is why Brother Bugnolo at the time denounced all that. He said, oh, this drove down turnout, made it, delegitimized it. Or, and hear me out on this, while there are a surprising number of Catholics at the time who thought that Benedict in his resignation was for one reason or another invalid, and even I had questions about it, though I wasn't willing to fully embrace the Benny Papist, now interregnumist position. But I didn't scorn it either, because I thought there was at least a chance that might actually be accurate. This was not just a step too far. This was like 50 steps too far. And, when the priest posted this to Facebook, I mean, you got a lot of different, but all along the same kind of line, responses making fun of it, including the Pope the anti-Pope who reigns from Andalusia, Spain. And of course, everyone's favorite anti-Pope, Pope Michael II, posted by Father Brendan, elected July 29th, 2023. If you're not familiar with Pope Michael II, that's because you might not be that familiar with Pope Michael, the late Pope Michael, who reigned from, I believe, Kansas, an American who clearly had special needs. And I never liked when people made fun of him because he clearly had needs, special needs. But he took to social media. He would post things on X and Facebook, and he was actually kind of a funny guy. But he was elected by his own family as anti-pope. Yes, his family members elected him pope. And now he's got a successor, apparently, in the Philippines. And this is the absurdity of all of this. And as Sean 1 says, this needs a new category for simony named simple simony. Yeah, the buying of stock for a corporation that is to protect the Holy Father because he's not being protected enough by the Vatican on the premise that he's essentially the Pope prophesized to flee the Vatican in the end times. Didn't happen. There's a lot of things that need to happen before that happens, including, I'm pretty sure, the arrival of Enoch and Elijah on the scene preaching about the Antichrist. If you don't see that happening, then whoever you think the Antichrist is probably not the Antichrist. Though it does stand to reason that the man of sin will be a known quantity before he makes his moves. But there is no Enoch and Elijah publicly preaching at this moment. That's all right out of like the book of Daniel and the book of the Apocalypse. It's all there in the scriptures as well as the approved prophecies of the church. It's all there. It's why whenever I post one of my weekend educational videos on the Antichrist, according to the Apostolic Fathers or the Middle Ages saints or whatever, when you listen to those, you learn a lot about who the Antichrist is going to be. And it keeps you from making absurd moves in life once you learn about them. Like, say, participating in a lay conclave that is not canonical by any stretch of the imagination, and electing a anti-pope. Of course, the most hilarious part of this whole story is that the result of that first conclave of 4 people, including the organizer, elected Jorge Mario Bergoglio as its pope. And then they believed and announced publicly that now that he's been validly elected pope, he will be receiving the graces of God and the scandals will end and yada, yada, yada. And that, of course, did not happen. 2023 happened. 2024 happened. I reported to you on the scandals every other day on this channel. And they continue to this day. Candle Glory says, I think you would go down a rabbit hole if you think the papal throne is vacant. Right. And here's the thing. I'm not making fun of normal sedevacantists. The typical sedevacantist doesn't spend his time with this stuff. They think the see is vacant. They don't go way down a deep, dark rabbit hole on it. They understand the sedevacantist position. They have accepted it for whatever reason they've accepted it for. And in most other ways, they're not really that different than other Catholics are. And that's the same is true for the interregnumists. Some very high-profile Catholic commentators don't believe Leo is anything but an anti-pope. Does that make them fringe people who are going to go hold their own lay conclave in Rome to elect a successor of Peter? No. But there are people who do that. Joe says, oops, did not know Pope Michael passed. At least he didn't do as much harm as Pope Francis. Yeah. Thomas Joseph says, Bishop Sanborn is not a nut, and never have I said that he was. Again, I don't have an interest. I don't have anything against sedevacantists as a group. Particular ones, absolutely. But the same could be said among normal traditional Catholics, normal ordinary form attendees. I don't dismiss anybody as a group. But individuals, well, I have particular opinions about individuals, many of whom I will keep to myself. Raven Ray says, what, an anti-pope from the Philippines? Wonders never cease. Well, to be fair, the Philippines are a Catholic country, we'll say, and they share the territory with another very hostile to Catholicism religion, though y'all have managed to figure out how to mostly get along, it seems. So where there are more Catholics, the more likely is that you're going to have something like that happen there, just as kind of a numbers thing. But instead of, necessarily mocking too much of this news that came from that Novus Ordo Watch reported, pray for Brother Bagnolo and pray for all of them. And while the story, I think, is hysterical, it gave me a good bounce to my step when I saw the story the other day. At the end of the day, pray for them. We do live in a diabolic disorientation period in the church, where seeing the truth is not so easy for a lot of people. We might ourselves be deluded about the state of things due to the diabolic disorientation. A very well-known traditional priest who in traditional circles as well is highly regarded. And I won't say his name. Many of you could probably easily figure this out. He said, don't make fun of sedevacantists. They might be right. Well, I don't think they are right. Very little would surprise me when everything shakes out at the end. The only thing that would surprise me is that the period we live in is valid. And I don't mean like your masses don't work. I mean that valid. I mean that the men, the human element of the church, and many of the high influential laymen who are helping the system keep going. The thing that would surprise me is if they were doing the will of God, because I don't think they are. That much is pretty clear. Although you wouldn't have the attrition rates of young people not holding on to the faith once they hit the age to make their own decisions. You certainly wouldn't have the vocations crisis. You wouldn't have people walking away from the faith. as well as, of course, all the McCarrick-related things and every other problem under the sun the church is facing right now, if the men running the church were doing the will of God. We'd have problems, sure, especially in these kind of diabolical times. There might be an open persecution in the West of the church instead of things playing at the shadows. So nothing would surprise me. But I'm curious what your thoughts on this are. Do you find the story as just kind of funny as I do? That it's good to see that there are still some absurd things we can kind of laugh at. Though, be warned, there are people who do believe Brother Rignolo and everything he does. There are. So pray that the truth comes out this. Daria says, wouldn't sedevacantism destroy apostolic succession? That is one of the key objections to it. It's one of the questions I don't have a good counter to. One of the reasons I never became a sedevacantist, because apostolic succession only survives in sedevacantism through their bishops, because their bishops are validly ordained. Although you can put an asterisk next to that because there's an internal conflict over certain groups and their episcopal lineage. But as a general rule, there are valid bishops among sedevacantist groups. But there's still a question of the validity of things, because how long can the church not have a pope for? And he is ultimately a source of authority, right? So at least the earthly authority. But I'm very curious what do you all think about this, so let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't, it does help. Share this on social media, it helps too. We're keeping this one short today. And as always, pray for the church and anybody we spoke about negatively today. I'm not trying to make you angry at them, make you hate them, or even mock these people. Pray for them. Souls are on the line. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.